I ordered a Mannlicher 1895 long rifle from Royal Tiger Imports. They had a flash sale on their B-grade rifles in the original 8x50R caliber for just $200. I think the regular price was $349. It's always a gamble ordering from RTI. The rifles are generally in poor condition, so what they're calling a B-grade is an even bigger gamble than usual. But I got a Mannlicher 88/90 from them previously. See the link in the description for that video series. And though it has its issues, a $200 World War I rifle is tough to be disappointed about. I just have some low expectations. The packaging leaves a little to be desired. It's just a folded piece of cardboard with the rifle inside. I could feel it moving around within the box. I'm lucky the bolt handle didn't poke through. I can see the front sight through the bubble wrap, so it's not like there's many layers of protection here. And the bubble wrap itself isn't actually taped, it's just wrapped around the rifle. And there it is. First impressions, I like it. It doesn't look so bad, and like I said, $200 well spent. It's always risky ordering a rifle sight unseen, especially from RTI, but so far I like what I'm seeing. Just touching it, I can feel how dirty it is. It'll need a good scrubbing. Since I mentioned my previous RTI rifle and direct predecessor to the 95 here, I'll do a quick size comparison to the Mannlicher 8890. The 95 has a much more compact action. The lengths of pull are about the same, but the bolt handle is further forward on the 95 than on the 88, but the overall length is about the same. Let's take a closer look now at the 95, starting from the back. There's some red paint on the butt, and a unit marking on top of the butt plate, though I can't quite make out what it says. There's a good sized dent on the side of the stock. The original sling swivel is present. It's a pretty wide loop. I can fit my finger through there. I always check the wrist of the stock right away to see if there's any cracks. Looks good on this side at least. The action looks good. There's these red specks on the magazine, though they just wipe off. And there looks to be a lot of the bluing left on the magazine body. The Ethiopians are known for having wire-wheeled the finish, and most likely the rust off a lot of their rifles prior to them being imported. My 88/90 was heavily wire-wheeled. This looks like they just got the top of the action, and left a lot of the other parts untouched. Taking a quick peek at the underside, the screws look okay until you get to this one in front of the action. And that's pretty mangled. Hopefully I'll be able to get it out, but I'll definitely need to do something with it, whether that's cutting a new slot or replacing the screw entirely. The rear sight is missing the slider, and a little screw that goes in here to stop the slider from coming off. The markings on it look good though. The hand grooves in the stock are pretty much worn down. In the middle band, look at that sling swivel. The Ethiopians are known for having some unique sling arrangements, from just a hole in the stock to a jury-rigged repair like this. I kinda like it though. It shows some level of ingenuity. Let me know down in the comments if I should leave it like this, or if I should try and track down a replacement. Going down to the front end, the front sight looks good. Flipping it over, there's an import mark. It's not too big and it's out of the way, which is nice. On the bottom is the stacking hook, which looks to be in good shape. I think a lot of these were broken off. I'll flip over the rifle. There's more red paint on this side. 16, maybe a rack number. Right behind it is a big dirt patch. That's probably just a preview of what's to come. Checking this side of the wrist. I'm not sure if that's a crack or not. If it is, it doesn't seem like a very big one, so hopefully it's not an issue. Again, the magazine looks good. There's only some bluing lost around the bottom edge. And there's a pretty distinct line on the receiver where they got it with the wire wheel. The safety is present on the bolt, which is nice since my 88/90 was missing it. There's the serial numbers of the rifle, matching on the barrel and the receiver. These were numbered just like a lot of the German rifles. The serial numbers reset each year starting at 1A in batches of 10,000, then they move on to 1B. So this rifle would have been made very early in the year as a part of the first batch. There's another shot of the middle band. After that action screw, I'm taking a look at all the other screw slots to make sure they all look good. And one last close-up at the front end. The chip in the handguard, along with the dent in the stock, looks to be the only flaws I can find. Looking at the markings now, this was made by Steyr in Austria. Some of these were made in Hungary, but it seems to be most common to see them made in Austria. On the barrel shank is the acceptance date. It's very worn down. Let's see if we can get it to show up. It's very faint. I can see it with my eyes, but getting on a camera is tough. I can just barely make out the 7 where it starts to taper down. I'll put a picture up to show that it's 1917. I'll try the trigger, which is pretty mushy feeling. Hopefully that will improve as I clean up the rifle. You can see that pushing the trigger forward lowers the bolt stop. Now I'll take out the bolt. See how the bolt head immediately rotates back into the bolt body? I read that new rifles, and ones in very good condition, have a good detent to prevent this, but worn ones like this decock themselves easily. The Mannlicher 8890 had a spring for the magazine follower not installed correctly, so I'm testing how this one is, and it looks good. And I have a clip on hand, so I'll try sliding it through the action, and it drops right out the bottom. There's a little bit of rust on top of the receiver. I'll have to fix that later. Here's the bolt. I'll get a close-up of the firing pin, which looks good. That should be enough stick out to detonate a primer. Now for a quick peek at the bore. That's not going to work, so I'll try it from the other end. And what's that? Looks like a packing peanut wedges itself in there. The board looks dirty, but I can see rifling. Some pitting, yes, but rifling through the whole barrel, which is a huge improvement over my 8890. I'll have to get a better video of that later on. Here I'm struggling to get the bolt head in line. Off camera I managed to wedge a piece of 9mm brass between the bolt head and the body to keep it in line. You can see that there's a guide on the bottom of the bolt body that needs to align with the slots in the receiver. And that's not going in. I think that the bolt head isn't all the way out, so I used a piece of 40 Smith & Wesson, which is a bit longer. I'll try this again. And this time it slides right in. The action is a bit stiff. But it's still way smoother than my 8890. With the overview done, let's move on to getting it apart. The first problem is this screw here, which has the slot worn down by quite a bit. I'll give it a good dose of Royal. I'm going to need all the help I can get, since you can see the screwdriver is sliding around and isn't a good fit in the slot. I'll make sure to press down really hard, and that was a lot of drama for no effect. I can take it right out, though I do need to keep pressure down. It was just barely tight. I think that the screw had been removed since the slot was worn down. The slot didn't wear down because the screw is stuck, which is usually the case. Now with that out of the way, I can move along and get the rear action screw undone. Lift out the magazine/trigger guard. Moving up front, I'll take the bands off, starting with the front one. Just a few taps and it comes off. The middle band has 2 screws, but it looks like this one is just to hold on the sling swivel. The one through the stock is what's holding it on, so I'll take that out now, and the band slides right off. And with those off, I can carefully lift off the stock. And then the handguard comes off too. That doesn't look too bad. There's quite a bit of bluing left where the stock was covering. No major rust at all that I can see. Here's a close-up of some additional markings under the barrel, and a close look at the original finish too. I'll circle back to the wood later. I just want to check the handguard for cracks. I don't see any, which is good. And I'll check the rest of the stock. I can't feel it moving at all, so it might just be fine. Either it's not a crack, or it's just not a very concerning one. Something I recently got that has come in real handy during these restorations is a barrel vise. Or this is actually a pipe vise. This holds the action securely, preventing it from moving around, but still keeps it close to the workbench for support, unlike the bench vise. I have a strip of leather to prevent the sharp teeth from marring the barrel. Then I can clamp it down. I can use it to hold the action securely while I remove the bolt, something I probably should have done while it was still in the stock. There's 2 screws behind the rear sight holding on the handguard retainer. I'll take those out, and the retainer itself. Then I'll take it out of the vise and down to the workbench. I'll support it with blocks and drive the rear sight pin out. I'll undo the spring screw, but I'll drive out the spring itself later. Moving back to the trigger, there's 3 pieces that I can see. Pulling the trigger causes the back of the sear to drop, releasing the cocking piece. The sear is held on by a pin, with one big end and one small. The trigger itself looks to be almost free-floating. I can wiggle it back and forth. I'll get set up to drive the pin out, but with the first tap it almost falls out on its own. And that's a weird sear arrangement, much different than the Mausers I'm used to. The trigger is one piece with the bolt stop, and this hook on the front that engages with the sear. There's 2 additional pieces on the sear. On the front, this looks to be the ejector, which is spring-loaded, and then there's this part which I'm not sure of the function. But here's how the trigger and the sear work together out of the rifle. This piece I can just wiggle out from inside the sear. The ejector has a very small pin holding it on. I think that I'm going to leave it attached instead of risking damaging it trying to get it out. One last piece remaining on the barreled action. I'll get it back into the vise and drive the rear sight spring forward. And then tap the pin out the rest of the way. And that's the last piece off of the barreled action. Altogether it doesn't look so bad, just very dirty. Moving on now to the magazine. I'll take out the 2 screws on the side. Then lift out the clip retainer on the back. And undo the screw holding the flat spring on. There is the screw on the bottom, but that looks to be retaining the flat spring that lifts the follower. And if this is anything like my 8890, there's angled cuts holding the bottom plate on. I'll push it forward. And that's pretty cool. A small self-contained unit for the follower arm. It's pivoting on this pin, another one with the large head on one side, which I really appreciate since it's easy to take apart, and I know how it goes back together. I'll put some Croyle on the screw to see if that helps. And that's not coming undone. I don't want to risk making it worse, and anyway it looks like I can get it apart without removing that screw. I'll start on the follower itself. And then the small flat spring. To get the arm out, I'll need to take pressure off the large flat spring. With a spacer on the bottom, I can use these pliers to compress it, just enough to push the pin through, and with some persuasion this time, unlike the sear pin. Now I'll move on to disassemble the bolt. I'll start by pulling back on the cocking piece, holding in the safety, and unscrewing the cocking piece. Then I'll pull out the bolt head along with the extractor, which drops free. The firing pin spring is inside, so I'll carefully unscrew the end cap and then pull out the firing pin and the spring. And that's odd, the spring has a bend to it, but that shouldn't be an issue. The last step is to remove the screw holding the safety on. And the last step in disassembly is to separate the last metal pieces from the stock. I'll start by cleaning out the screw slots in the sling swivel, and then unscrew the two screws. I'll clean out the butt plate screws as well. And I can just feel this is going to be tough, so I need some more support. And that's not budging. You can see how I mangled the slot, but I'll drive the steel back in with just a few hammer taps. I move to the bench vise to hold the stock tighter to get better leverage. I'm able to get the top screw out. Now for the bottom screw. On a whim, I'll try and clean it out more. And yeah, it looks like there's more dirt in there. I can feel the screwdriver blade going in much deeper now. I'll put a wrench on it for more leverage. And thankfully that got it moving. The butt plate is typically the worst part of military rifles, and you can see here why it's important to get it off. And to symbolize the end of the disassembly, I'll take the tag off from the trigger guard. Now to start on cleaning it up. My process starts with removing the big chunks of grease and grime. To do that, I'll use a popsicle stick to scrape it away, something that won't harm the original finish. On tight areas or areas that won't be seen, I'll use a steel pick. And for the 1 or 2 spots where there's thick rust, I'll use this copper penny and a drop of oil to scrub it away. From there, I'll use a degreaser and a plastic bristle brush to remove all of the old grease, dirt, and oils. Let's get going. To summarize what I just did, I scraped off the large chunks of grease and grime, and then scrubbed away the rest. Both of those are done with tools that won't affect the original finish, and then I let the part soak for a while in degreaser. Now that everything is clean on the outside, I'm going to clean the inside of the barrel just like how I would clean any other gun. I'll dip a brush in solvent and run it down the bore a few times. Same as on the outside, all I want to do is remove any grease, dirt, and oils. I'll follow up with a few cloth patches, but I won't go too crazy. I'm not wanting to run them through till they come out clean. The next step is to fish all the parts out of the degreaser, move to a clean pan, and then back to the pot again. I'm being careful not to lose any of the small stuff. There's some especially small screws on this rifle that are easy to lose track of. And with all the small parts in a clean pot, I'll fill it up with water and bring it outside to set on the burner. For the barreled action, I have this PVC pipe that's mounted to a toilet flange and a piece of sheet metal with a few holes drilled in it. I'll carefully slide the action in and cap it off with an end cap that has a few small vent holes drilled into it. With the water boiling, I'll set the pipe on top of the pot. The idea is that the steam from the boiling water goes up through the holes, filling the pipe. The boiling water, in the case of the small parts, and the steam, in the case of the action, will convert the red rust on the steel to bluing. I'm going to set a timer and let this go for about 45 minutes. While I'm waiting, it's a good time to clean up the stock. I have some hot soapy water and some paper towels. I'll use them to scrub off the old dirt and oil spots. The paper towel isn't abrasive enough to disturb the original finish. If your stock isn't coming clean with just soapy water, you can try using a heat gun to drive the oils to the surface, but something more involved like sanding I truly consider as a last resort. With water though, you want to make sure to dry the wood quickly so it doesn't absorb any excess moisture. And it didn't look like it, but it took about an hour to scrub the stock, so it's time to check on the metal parts. With welding gloves, I'll slide out the barreled action. And with pliers, I'll pull the small parts out of the brown colored water. I'll give them a shake, but usually just having the hot parts cool down slowly is enough to remove any excess water. I'll then move to the carding wheel. This isn't a wire wheel, as I can run my fingers in it without bleeding. The wires are just 3/1000ths of an inch, very similar to 4/0 steel wool. They'll remove any loose rust while leaving the original finish beneath. I've found you don't really need to push the parts into the wheel, just let the wheel do the work. I'll use it on all the parts, even the screw heads. There are areas I can't get to with the carding wheel, like the inside of the trigger guard and inside the barrel bands. So for those I'll use steel wool by hand, again letting the steel wool do the job, no need to really scrub. Now to make extra sure that all of the water has been removed, I'll separate any parts out that can still have water hidden inside, or in small nooks and crannies, and a few of the extra bigger parts just to be sure. And I'll soak them all in kerosene. The kerosene will displace any water that's left and help clean up the parts just a little bit more. Since it's a little messy, I poured kerosene through the barrel and inside of the receiver off camera. It's not necessary to let them soak for a while, so once the parts are outside of the kerosene, the last step is to apply oil. I use non-detergent oil, which I found as air compressor oil, but that might vary based on what's available to you. I'll just pour the oil over and use a towel or my hands to work it over the parts. I usually leave them oiled overnight or longer before I come back and wipe off the excess. It's been a few days, and before I wipe off the excess oil, I'm going to turn my attention to the stock. It's fully dried now, and you can see the difference before and after cleaning with soap, just how much dirt was on it to start with. It's feeling pretty dry, so I'm going to put some boiled linseed oil on it. I'm not sure exactly what was used when these were made, but from what I've seen it's some type of oiled finish, and BLO is perfect to bring some life back into the stock. I'm going to use a towel to wipe on a very thin coat of oil. And just in the time it took to wipe a coat on the whole stock, you can see how much is soaked into the wood by comparing the shiny versus the dull areas. I'll add some more and then set it up to dry. After about 15 minutes, I'll come back with a clean towel and wipe away any excess oil. And then I'll hang it up again, this time to dry for the next couple days. Back to the metal, I'll wipe off any excess oil on the parts, and then the barreled action too. And with the metal wipe down, I'll pop up a before and an after of the chamber area which had a rust spot. It wasn't very rusty to begin with, but it's certainly an improvement. Next I'll check out the bore finally. Here's a shot up close to the muzzle. I can see rust right up to the end. Some of that will come out with brushing just like the rest of the metal, but that's not a good sign. Off camera I brushed and then oiled the bore. Here's a look down it. And well, that's not good. Sort of like a sewer pipe. But there is rifling throughout, unlike my Mannlicher 88/90 which only had half of its rifling. There's also pitting throughout. It's not as bad as the 88/90, but it's still pretty bad. I don't have very high hopes in this being a shooter, but I'll certainly give it a try. But before then, I need to reassemble the rifle, so let's get going on that. And to do so, I first need to do something with these screws. This one's usable as is. The slot is only deformed slightly, but I might as well fix it while it's out. I'll use a hammer to lightly peen the screw head, pushing the metal back into the slot. This one is the real problem screw. I'm going to use a hacksaw to cut a new slot 90 degrees to the old one. I'll test fit the screwdriver to make sure there's enough meat for it to get a good grip. I really should replace this screw, but this will prolong its life for now and allow me to get the rest of the rifle back together. Now for the sub-assemblies, I'll start on the magazine follower. I'll use these pliers to compress the spring that I couldn't get apart to push the pin through holding on the arm. Then there's this flat spring and screw. And then the follower itself. Next is the clip release on the magazine body. It goes on like so, but first I need to attach the flat spring. And it goes in like this and held in place by a screw. And now the follower. There's angled cuts at the rear and it slides into place. That allows this one screw to hold it together. Now a quick function check on both pieces to make sure they're working correctly. Next is the bolt. I'll start with the safety which goes onto the bolt body and is held in place by a screw. The spring goes on the firing pin and the pin into the bolt head. Then the end cap compresses the spring and screws on. This flat on the firing pin is about 45 degrees from the extractor groove on the bottom of the bolt head. The flat goes towards the bolt handle. I'll wiggle it around until I can push it together. I'll make sure the extractor groove ends up on the bottom of the bolt. To put in the extractor, I'll pull out the bolt head slightly, insert it, then push back in the bolt head to keep it in place. The cocking piece goes in like so. I can start screwing it in, but to get it in all the way I'll have to pull back and then turn it some more. Once it's on all the way, there's a small gap between the cocking piece and the bolt body. The firing pin stick out looks good, and the other end is just proud. I'll pull out the bolt head and put in the same piece of 40 Smith & Wesson brass that I used earlier. Moving to the barreled action, I'll slide on the rear sight spring and screw it down. I'll use pliers to compress it, and then I can squeeze in the pin. This piece is the handguard retainer. It drops in and is held in place by two very small screws. I didn't end up buying a replacement sight slider. It would only be needed for ranges beyond the battle site. I don't have a 600-yard range near me, so no need for it now. The trigger group fits together like so, and drops into place. And the pin slides through. A quick function test. And this is interesting. This piece on the receiver fits into the slot on the magazine. They go together like so. So besides the wood and the screws, this also helps hold the pieces together. That's it for the barreled action. It's been a couple days, and here's what the stock looks like. The boiled linseed oil darkened up the stock quite a bit. I'll add a shot of it now to the comparison I did earlier. That's the original on the left, the cleaned in the middle, and then the oiled on the right. There's quite the difference between the three. To keep going with the reassembly, I'll start with the butt plate. Anytime I have screws going into wood, I like to get a little bit of paste wax on the threads for lubrication. Wood expands and shrinks, and the last thing you want is for the hole to shrink, causing the screw to snap off. I've had that happen to me before. I'll do the same for the screws holding on the sling swivel. And it's really coming together now. I'll drop the stock onto the action, and then add the magazine. The front screw slot is a real tight fit on the screwdriver, making it easy to put back in. Then I can slide on the barrel bands, making sure to orient the middle band so the screw head is on the left. The front band can only go in one way, so it's a bit easier. And the last piece is to slide the bolt in. And that's the complete rifle. It feels like forever since it's been together. Real time it's been about 5 weeks. Here's a quick overall comparison with the before on the top and the after beneath. And it feels much better as well. Just handling at the wood finish. And the action is, dare I say, smooth. The trigger feels better too. It's less gummy than it was to begin with. Overall, I'm very happy with how it turned out visually. The wood is beautiful looking, and though the metal has been wire wheeled a bit, it still has some patina left. The bore condition is rough, but I'll have to see how it does at the range. And that's all I have for now. Keep an eye out for the shooting video in the future, and thanks for sticking around to the end of this very long one. Thanks for watching.